Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. It appears that Germany's own Nina Meinke has booked herself yet another fight later on this month, on the 24th, opposite the ring, Japan's own
Kamika, Miyoshi.
For what's supposed to be a WBA gold title in the women's featherweight division. I have to say that the schedule of activity that Nina Meinke is on is admirable. If nothing else, the team she has around her does a very good job of keeping her busy, keeping her active, keeping her sharp. As sharp as she can be. Set to go down on Saturday, the 24th of this month in Germany.
Nina's gonna have home field advantage.
I don't think it's Nina Menke's intention to challenge this division's only champion, Amanda Serrano, who is in possession of all the alphabet titles, all the belts. I don't really think that's what Nina is trying to do, per se.
Seems to me like the 30-year-old southpaw is just biding her time and using it as best as she can to still improve, still hone her skills, and become a better fighter over time.
I don't give Nina Meinke any kind of odds against Amanda Serrano, but against somebody like Kamika Miyoshi.
Sports professional record of 17 wins with 13 losses, 2 draws, 39 years old.
9 years older than Nina Meinke, having been stopped at least 3 times in those 13 losses.
Definitely older than Nina Meinke, somewhat smaller tail of the tape.
Nina Meinke, who sports a professional record of 16 wins with 3 losses, no draws.
4 knockouts.
Having only ever been knocked out once, and that was up there at lightweight some years ago, opposite the ring, Katie Taylor.
Unbeknownst to most, Nina Meinke used to campaign as a lightweight, but over the years, she made her way down to featherweight, and it has proven to be a better, more manageable weight for her.
In hindsight, though, here today, it really is one of the deeper, more talent-rich divisions in the entire sport of women's boxing, with unbeaten up-and-comers like Skye Nicholson and Karis Hardingstall, Raven Chapman, Sophia Leash, Sarah Liegman, Ebony Jones,
Tiaria Brown.
Bright young fighters, bright unbeaten up-and-comers, every single one of them. Over time, featherweight has become one of the deeper, more talent-rich divisions in the sport of boxing, and the best thing that Nina Meinke can do in that situation is keep herself busy,
stay sharp,
because it just so happens that every single one of the major promotional outfits has a prize stallion in that featherweight show. Queensberry has Raven Chapman, Matchroom has Skye Nicholson, Boxer has Karis Hardingstall,
Bozerman has Sophia Leash.
Nina Meinke being an experienced and serviceable fighter, serviceable southpaw, it's conceivable that at some point, one or some, if not all of those major promotional outfits are going to give her a call
to match Nina against one of their fighters, their unbeaten up-and-comers. Nina Meinke may not have the same ceiling as a Raven Chapman or a Karis Hardingstall, a Tiaria Brown. She doesn't, but she still is an experienced and serviceable fighter, a serviceable southpaw.
Had a very busy year last year. She fought 4 times last year, and she's already seen action once, at least once this year, back in March.
She'll be back in action later on this month for what is a WBA gold title, a title that can be used as a segue to fight for the full title, to challenge Amanda Serrano. And I reiterate, I don't think it's Nina's intention to do that.
I don't think it's her intention to challenge Amanda per se, but she can use that WBA gold title as leverage to get herself a decent purse against one of these unbeaten up-and-comers, one of these unbeaten fighters promoted by these major promotional outfits. I mean, I think that's the most use, the most mileage she can get out of that WBA gold title if she wins it.
Maybe she doesn't want to fight Amanda, but maybe somebody else does.
Maybe winning that WBA gold title could help get them in position, provided they're willing to pay to play and pay Nina Meinke.
She's just got to make sure to secure the W later on this month opposite the ring, Kamika Miyoshi. Miyoshi, I think she can.
Nina Meinke, who's coming off a second-round TKO stoppage of Italy's own Angelina Cannizaro.
It was their second fight. They fought before in December of 2020, fought again earlier this year in March. Nina won both fights.
Now she's set to return to action later on this month. Keep your eyes peeled for that. In men's super middleweight news, Samson Lukowicz took to his social media to say, "Unfortunately today, from Boxing Hall of Fame, I have to officially communicate to all the lovers of our beloved sport that Canelo and Team Canelo did not respond to our proposal to fight with David Benavidez. This fight will not happen." And what they're talking about now is moving ahead with a David Morrell fight. David Morrell,
What?
presumably on pay-per-view. These are just my thoughts.
That's not going to sell anything.
It's not going to sell. If you didn't do an excess of 200,000 or 300,000 with a more familiar face and a more familiar fighter in Caleb Plant, you're not going to do that with a guy like David Morrell, who only has, 9, maybe 10 fights?
Most people don't know him.
It's not even a bad fight. It's actually a good fight.
Good.
An intriguing fight, but it's not a box office fight. It's not box office worthy. Just because you're putting him in there with a guy with a pulse, just because you're putting him in there with a good fighter, doesn't make it box office worthy. And this fight,
They'll be lucky to sell 200,000 with this thing.
I have my reservations about Samson Lukowicz and the supposed proposal that he made that's only really been out there for less than a week.
Just about.
This isn't a normal set of negotiations. You're not negotiating with any run-of-the-mill fighter, any Joe Blow. You're talking about the cash cow of boxing. You're talking about Canelo Alvarez, a guy whose name you can't keep out of your mouth, and you're giving him a week.
That's it.
You're giving him a deadline? Is that how this works now? You're dictating terms and timeframes to Canelo Alvarez? Try and understand that this proposed David Morrell fight is set to go down sometime in the fall, around October.
Or in June, you understand. You have all of July, all of August, and September.
This proposal that Samson Lukowicz allegedly made has only been out there for less than a week or just about a week's time, and you're not talking about a proposal to just any fighter for what would be just any fight. You're talking about the biggest draw in boxing in this country, a guy who just sold 450,000 pay-per-view buys reportedly with the likes of John Ryder,
That's the kind of drawing power he's got.
per World Boxing News, and you're giving him less than a week to accept your offer, if the offer was even real, because according to Eddie Reynoso, he didn't receive anything from anyone. Nothing from Top Rank, nothing from Matchroom, and nothing from the PBC. Samson Lukowicz, he said the opposite. A bona fide case of he said, she said that all boils down to who do you trust? Who do you believe? And I'm sorry to say that I don't believe Samson Lukowicz.
Because this isn't how you do business.
And this certainly isn't how you make a fight like this. A fight between a Canelo Alvarez and a David Benavidez. You're giving Canelo a week to accept. And if not, you're going to move forward with a fight that's all the way out there in October.
Then what's the rush?
Why are you rushing to judgment in reference to Canelo if the fight with Morrell is all the way out there in October? Surely, given the size and scale of the fight and who Canelo Alvarez is, his stature in the sport, surely you could give him more time to mull it over. It seems to me that Samson is in quite a hurry.
To kill this conversation, kill these negotiations, withdraw his supposed proposal.
So that he can try and cultivate public support behind the guise of, at least I tried. At least I tried to make the fight.
By giving them less than a week's time to accept.
I'll tell you what I would like. I would like for the people at Matchroom and DAZN to formulate a proposal of their own. I would like for the people at Matchroom and DAZN to make David Benavidez an offer.
Samson Lukowicz, who promotes David, says that the David Morrell fight is already signed. But if that fight is already signed, then how legitimate was your offer to Canelo?
If DAZN and Matchroom were to, hypothetically, make David Benavidez an offer for a Canelo Alvarez fight, you can't turn around and say, well, we can't accept it because we're fighting David Morrell.
That fight is all the way out there in October.
Moreover, if the contract for the Morrell fight was already signed, as Samson Lukowicz claimed, then how are you expecting to fight Canelo Alvarez?
Doesn't make sense.
This seems like a smokescreen to me, folks. A smokescreen to cultivate public support and continue to use the name of Canelo Alvarez to promote David Benavidez. Promote him in the absence of an actual fight.
And this is the fight I want to see in September.
I don't want to see a B-ball rematch. I've made that crystal clear. The fight I want, for my money, is the Benavidez fight, and it's for this reason that in spite of what Samson is saying, I'm holding out hope that Eddie Hearn and Matchroom will decide to formulate an offer of their own anyway, because this fight is worth a hell of a lot more than a Morrell fight.
I just don't understand it.
You're giving the face of boxing one of only 2 boxers in the Forbes list as the highest earners in their respective sport. You're giving him a week.
That's it.
If you can't see the forest through the trees on this one, I don't know what to tell you. But this is not how you conduct business, least of all when you are so obviously the B-side. I'm hoping that Eddie Hearn and Matchroom decide to move forward and offer him Canelo. See what he says. And if he says, well, I can't fight Canelo because I'm fighting David Morrell.
Yeah, that's bullshit.
It's bullshit because the summer months just started and the fight you're talking about is all the way out there in the fall. What are you trying to convince me of? That fighting David Morrell means more to you than fighting Canelo based on which platform it's on?
Eddie Hearn should call their bluff and make them an offer. There's no reason DAZN can't make a play for this fight.
Errol Spence Jr. was asked if he would fight Canelo Alvarez in the future, to which he responded, we're not thinking about Canelo right now, but I definitely take that fight. I feel like 165, 168, that's more my natural weight, and it's a lot easier for me to make, so I definitely take that fight.
His natural weight is super middleweight, but he's been campaigning as a welterweight all these years.
That's what he said. Errol Spence Jr. versus Canelo Alvarez as a conversation. It's been around for some years. I think it goes all the way back to maybe 2019, circa 2019. It never got off the ground. It never materialized. In truth, I don't think Errol Spence Jr. stands a chance against Canelo Alvarez, but the conversation itself, it has been around for a while. And if you're imagining a world where Errol Spence Jr. versus Canelo Alvarez becomes a viable fight, you are in essence imagining a world where he beats Terrence Crawford and skips past super middleweight and middleweight.
You'd have to be imagining a world where he wins the fight in late July with Terrence.
So you can imagine, many people have varying opinions on this fight. Who's going to win? Is it going to be Terrence? Is it going to be Errol? But for a fight between Errol and Canelo to come into fruition, I personally think he would have to beat Terrence Crawford, because if he loses, if he gets stopped, I think that pretty much takes Canelo Alvarez off the table.
He gets knocked out at 147. He's going to try his luck with Canelo at 168.
Now, after Canelo Alvarez knocked out Caleb Plant, reportedly, he was made an offer that included a potential Spence fight, potentially. Canelo obviously didn't accept the offer, but you have to imagine that if he did,
we wouldn't be here now. We wouldn't be getting the Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. fight, because in that scenario, Canelo would have fought Errol Spence Jr. already.
You go all the way up to 165 or 168, you're not going to go all the way back down to 147, not unless you plan on getting knocked out. A drop that steep.
It's a big drop.
Male boxers don't move as freely through the weights as women boxers do. You might see something like that in women's boxing with fighters like Amanda Serrano and Natasha Jonas, Terry Harper, so on and so forth, to where they could go all the way back up, and maybe, just maybe, they can come down.
Clarissa Shields did.
But male boxers don't move as freely through the weights as ladies do. So Errol Spence Jr. going up for a Canelo fight, potentially losing that fight, then what? He drops back down to welterweight so he can lose again.
I think it all depends on what you think would happen if Errol Spence Jr. moved up in weight and took on Canelo Alvarez. There might be a small contingent, a few, who think Errol would stand a chance, though I'm of the opinion that if he did go up there, he'd get knocked out.
Some may point to
Floyd
Mayweather beating Canelo Alvarez many years ago, but this is many years later, and Errol Spence Jr. is no Floyd Mayweather. Yeah, Floyd beat Canelo Alvarez back when Canelo was 23 years old.
Campaigning as a junior middle.
Many years later, he is a more experienced fighter that is no longer campaigning at junior middle. I think Canelo Alvarez would have to cut off one of his legs to make that weight. No, he's campaigning as a super middleweight. And if Errol were to take a leap of faith like that, I'm convinced it would backfire. I'm convinced that he was ready to cash out.
That's what that was.
I'm convinced that the only reason we're here now is because Canelo didn't take them up on that offer. Because if he had, he would have stopped Spence, and that would have completely wrote off a potential Crawford fight.
I think Errol was ready to cash out, and because Canelo didn't take him up on his offer, this fight, the Crawford fight, is his only viable option for a big fight.
Because aside from this one, what other fights equal in size and scale are out there for Errol at 147, at 154? The only fight bigger than a Crawford fight for Errol would have been a Canelo fight.
I've got Crawford knocking him out, by the way.
Making all of this much ado about nothing. And just in keeping with the theme of all things Errol Spence Jr., Terrence Crawford, for the undercard, Isaac Pitbull Cruz will be facing Brian Cabrera as the co-main event to the main event. This must be the fight that he's rejected Shakur Stevenson for, because clearly Brian Cabrera is a more well-known guy than Shakur Stevenson, or is it?
Bear in mind that Shakur Stevenson headlines his own fights, whereas Isaac doesn't, but he rejected him.
Isaac Cruz, who, since having dropped a decision to Gervonta Davis over a year ago, has turned his nose up at quite a few fights with quite a few fighters. He turned his nose up at an offer from Golden Boy Promotions to fight Ryan Garcia, turned his nose up at his PBC stablemate, then unbeaten, Michelle Rivera. He was ordered to fight Shakur Stevenson by way of the WBC. They rejected that fight.
And this is who they're keeping busy with. This is who they're fighting.
Some may hesitate to call this an outright duck, but that's exactly what it is. You rejected a fight with a better fighter for a lesser fighter, a lesser fight that just so happens to be a more winnable fight. What they're doing here is they've got Isaac on standby for Gervonta Davis's ring return. It's not set in stone that Gervonta will fight him in his very next fight, but I have seen an interest expressed from Calvin Ford in running it back with Isaac Cruz.
Calvin's been willy-nilly throwing names around since Gervonta knocked out Ryan. This was one of the names, one of the more realistic ones.
There's been an effort, fight by fight, to put Isaac Cruz on the undercards of PBC shows, relatively big PBC shows, this being the next one, in an effort to build him into a draw unto himself in the hopes that perhaps that will make a Davis rematch even bigger. And in truth, I do think Davis versus Cruz 2 will be bigger than Davis versus Cruz 1, though the bar being set so low.
That's not saying much.
Davis versus Cruz 1 sold next to nothing, mostly because Isaac Cruz, going into that fight, he was a late replacement that no one was familiar with. I think the fans know a little bit more about him now, and I think a second fight could do better than the first, though coming nowhere near what Gervonta did with Ryan Garcia.
Don't you see how fast they were shouting it from the rooftops that the Ryan Garcia fight did in excess of 1 million pay-per-view buys? They didn't do that with the Isaac Cruz numbers. To date, they never reported them.
They reported the Leo Santa Cruz numbers and the Rolly Romero numbers, the Ryan Garcia numbers, but not these.
Not for the first fight.
If there is a second, I do think it'll sell more than the first fight did, but I don't think it's going to come anywhere near what Gervonta Davis did with Ryan Garcia. Expect a steep drop.
A sharp decline in sales from the Ryan Garcia fight going into a potential Isaac Cruz rematch.
Further accenting what I've been telling you all along, the only reason that fight sold as much as it did is because of Ryan. Without him, Gervonta Davis don't bring in numbers like that, and he won't with a Cruz rematch.
Maybe it does a little 200, 225, maybe 250.
Hell, maybe even 300,000, but even 300,000 doesn't come anywhere near what he did with Ryan.
Proving my point.
There's no real reason for Gervonta to run it back with Isaac Cruz, aside from proximity, that he's there.
PBC are not above staging pointless rematches. Remember, they had Wilder fight Luis Ortiz for a second time.
So I don't put this pointless rematch past them.